Rain. It was raining. You hear the rain?
Mm-hmm.
You hear it? Find it. Tell me when you found it.
When a person encounters a traumatic event in their life, it has the potential to lead to regularly occurring distressful symptoms. When these symptoms cause significant impairment to daily functioning, a person may be dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. Most of the time, PTSD symptoms are triggered in an involuntary way, without any intention made by the person or their surroundings. Alternatively, Chris Washington in the film Get Out has a very different experience in which his symptoms are artificially and purposely provoked by Chris's girlfriend Rose and her family. Through a closer examination of the character in the film, we can see the ways that Chris's experience of PTSD is initiated in a planned and methodical fashion. Chris is someone who was born and raised in the city, seemingly feeling most comfortable in this environment as evidenced by his photography of cityscapes and people. But the trip he is taking with his girlfriend Rose is headed to the country, a place of spread out locales and foreign sights and sounds. As he travels to his destination, he speaks with his best friend on the phone. Rod expresses his own concerns about going to these isolated areas, believing that Chris should be careful of his surroundings. It's as if Chris is already becoming hypervigilant. He is needing to be constantly on the lookout for looming threats. As he travels through the wooded terrain, the car hits a deer and Chris gets out to check on the animal. He makes this decision in a mostly unconscious way, almost like another part of him is compelling himself to look closer. He watches the deer slowly dying in front of him, but he is unable to avert his eyes. His affectual state remains blunted, while the underlying mood of the scared boy inside is filled with terror and horror. Chris soon meets Rose's family members, groundskeeper and maid, and he consistently has the look of a bewildered and uncertain person. He is trying to figure out what is going on here, as everything is just a tad bit peculiar. Being unable to connect with the house members in a meaningful way, he starts to become estranged and detached from his surroundings. One of the many symptoms that accompany PTSD, he is a stranger in a strange land, where the ground underneath his feet is constantly shifting and unstable.
My dad wasn't really in the picture. My mom passed away when I was like 11.
Oh, I'm sorry. How did she die?
Hit and run.
That's awful.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that.
You were young.
Well, actually, I don't remember a lot from that time, so...
We soon learn that Chris has suppressed memories of his mother's death, in which his unconscious mind attempted to remove the memories so as to distance himself from painful feelings. This provides a clearer understanding of why he reacted to the deer in such a bizarre way, as Chris himself is not fully aware of the processes in his psyche. As he speaks about the trauma, he becomes visibly anxious, desiring to smoke a cigarette. It seems that smoking has been his lifelong strategy to deal with traumatic pain, and now that he has quit, he is craving a puff to deal with distressing thoughts he has long ignored.
What about your mother?
What about her? Wait, are we...
Where were you when she died?
When Missy sits down to analyze Chris, it becomes more evident that his trauma is coming to the forefront during his trip to their house. She begins her hypnotic spell, and he recalls specific blocked-out memories about his trauma, including that he was watching TV, that it was raining, and how he was clawing on his chair. He admits that he just sat there and didn't do anything to help his mother. Chris is talking about how helpless he felt, his complete loss of autonomy, something that often happens to people when they experience trauma in their lives. Missy tells him to sink into the floor, and he falls into the sunken place, an alternate form of reality that is meant to replicate the experience that trauma creates for an individual. It's a place in which one is controlled by their past, a place which suffocates them and leaves them unable to handle adverse life events. It makes sense why Chris has avoided these memories for so long, because they result in feelings of weakness, fragility, and disability. Chris awakens from his trip to the sunken place to see his phone disconnected. The family is attempting to cut him off from the external world so that he loses all sense of objective reality, and where the skewed reality of the Armitage house is the only one he can rely on. But this reality is slowly morphing into a re-experiencing of his old trauma, one that is bent on taking away his personal will by shifting his center of gravity. He soon mentions to Rose that he had a dream in which he couldn't escape from a hole he fell into, and although he can't consciously remember what happened after being hypnotized, his unconscious mind was able to create a symbolic expression of what he experienced in the sunken place. He still remembers this distressing and upsetting dream, a type of anxiety-provoking nightmare which often stems from past trauma. Chris continues to feel alone and out of place around the party guests, a result of their inappropriate gestures and off-putting ways of conversing. This makes Chris feel even more detached and estranged from his surroundings, while also finding it difficult to feel any type of positive emotional state. Chris soon becomes more disturbed by the actions of others when he is the only one who sees something wrong with the way that Andre reacted to the flash of the camera. Chris feels himself going insane, since everyone else is unable to see the facts that are so apparent to his own eyes. He is unable to trust his own judgments and perceptions, something which benefits the plans of Rose's family.
I think your mom got in my head, right? I think she got in my head.
Yeah, and it worked, I
No, it
thought.
did not. It didn't work. She got in my head, and now I'm thinking all this fucked up shit that I don't want to think about.
Chris's autonomic nervous system is now increasingly heightened. The deeply embedded emotional part of his brain is telling him to get the hell out of there, just as he was previously instructed by Andre. He's feeling just as he did as a child, in which instead of directly responding to imminent danger, he's doing his best to flee from the scene and avoid it all. As he speaks to Rose, he soon reveals his shame and guilt for not responding to his mother's accident in a more timely manner. Chris appears to hold a persistent and negative belief about himself as a result of the trauma and the ensuing events. And although many symptoms of PTSD are being brought to the surface at this point of the film, we must remember how Chris's attempt to process and discuss the past will pay off for the character in the end. He and Rose make a plan to take flight from the home, but before he can leave, he discovers the truth behind Rose and their trip to the woods. He is now experiencing startle response and increased hypervigilance as he suspects danger around every corner, since he is now without any aid. He was prepared to run, but he is now resigned to fight, as he is confronted by Rose's aggressive brother, with her parents looming in the background. But before anything can happen, Chris is sent back to the sunken place, and all of his efforts have been neutralized. The sunken place once again functions in the same way as PTSD symptoms, in which terrors from the past reappear and leave an individual in a state of inert non-functionality.
Phase one was the hypnotism. That's how they sedate you. Phase two is this. Mental preparation. It's basically a psychological pre-op.
Yeah.
For phase three, the transplantation.
And as Jim the photographer explains the procedure to his brain transplant partner, we learn how artificially induced PTSD is a critical sequence of the operation. The patient must be psychologically prepared for transplantation in step 3, because at that point he will reside in a new body. It's a fitting description of what occurs for someone with PTSD. Oftentimes they feel like a stranger to themselves, as if they are stuck in a body which is not theirs, a result of not being able to fully connect with the feelings of the person who was originally traumatized. It was absolutely necessary for Chris's past difficulties to be consciously realized. The operation hinges upon him knowing what it feels like to be a passenger in his own body, before his brain is literally extracted from his corpse. By being induced into PTSD, he will not be as overwhelmed or try to fight the sunken place, actions which would lead to complications in the operation. Chris soon peers up at the deer on the wall, and we get a look of slight recognition. He puts the pieces together in that hitting the deer was not an accident after all, and that it was in fact the first step in putting Chris back in the domain of his traumatic past. But unfortunately for the Armitage family, they seem to have overlooked the ways that conscious understanding of past trauma can also lead to liberation from the impact it has on a person's livelihood. The ability to allow previously suppressed memories to resurface has provided Chris the opportunity to process and think through these past events. By remembering the details of the trauma, he also recollected his clawing of the chair and the way he utilized it as a coping method. The details he tried so hard to push away actually become his saving grace, as the ability to scratch through the chair gives him the ability to stuff his ears with cotton and avoid the sunken place. As if he was participating in trauma therapy, he is being exposed to memories so that his past can be integrated and function as a part of his personality. It soon becomes apparent how Chris has been strengthened by accessing and processing these past events. He does not hesitate to bash in Jeremy's head and proceeds to kill Dean and Missy with clear-minded simplicity. Instead of being handicapped with fear, instead of wanting to run from the danger, he is instead invigorated and doing exactly what is needed to knock down the barriers to his freedom. Even when Jeremy returns and puts him in a headlock, we see Chris's ability to avoid an amygdala hijack. He stays several steps ahead of Jeremy, performing a type of mental jujitsu by manipulating the brother to raise his leg before it can be stabbed. Normally, Chris's intellectual abilities would have been paralyzed, but he is instead thinking in a lucid and logical manner. Chris gets out of the house, fighting through the loathsome family who attempted to take advantage of his vulnerabilities, before he is saved by Rod, a person who helps Chris stabilize and return to a mental baseline. The family believed that they could take advantage of Chris, just as they had with Rose's previous partners, by turning his weakness against him so as to strip him of all his power. But Chris turned his weakness into strength. He utilized parts of himself that were long dormant and that he always tried to avoid, leading to an escape from the house and towards a future path of mental and emotional freedom. This concludes this video on the psychology of Get Out. Please watch my other videos on other TV and film characters if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.